The Exorcist Believer is directed by David Gordon Green and stars Leslie Odom Jr., Ellen Bernstein, and among others. And in this story, it deals with two little girls that end up getting lost in the woods and end up eventually getting found. And upon being found, they end up pretty much becoming possessed by the demon that was from the original Exorcist film. And along the way, it's up to one of the fathers, that's played by Leslie Odom Jr., to essentially try to find a way, along with the parents of the other little girl, to try to prevent save the two girls from the possession. And along the way, he also, the Leslie Odom Jr.'s character, ends up having to come across Chris McNeil, who has dealt with the situation before. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, this movie is the sixth film in the Exorcist franchise, and what can I say? The original Exorcist franchise, the original Exorcist film from 1973, is definitely may possibly go down as my all-time favorite horror film. And to this day, upon rewatch, I can't get enough of it. It's definitely my favorite William Friedkin movie. May he tragically rest in peace this year, since he passed away. And there's just so much that was told that movie basically changed the way we saw with horror films today. And a lot of it would lead also to countless knockoffs and a lot of possession movies that you would see in a lot of areas. And also spawn its own franchise as well, especially with the really poorly done and really such a mess of a sequel called Exorcist II: The Heretic. And then also years later when we had William Peter Blatty, the original author of the book that The Exorcist was based on. He did a book called Legion that was turned into a film called Exorcist III. And then, but the original plan was to make it just title it Legion. But that was the third film. To me, to this day, still holds as the best sequel, as it was able to do something different on doing a psychological take on the story, while also, still honoring the original film and bringing back Jason Miller as Father Karras, and then being this very kind of like unsettling type of vibe with this, patient that having like a split personality with this killer that's played by Brad Dourif. And to me, to this day, that movie I found such a criminally unrelated film for the 90s. And if they would have really ended there with the third film, I would have been totally happy with it. And then they eventually did the two prequels, that was Exorcist: The Beginning and then Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, which I've finally seen both of them, especially with Dominion. And I can honestly say that they're not as bad as I thought they would be, because I heard a lot of bad things about them. But I think that Exorcist Beginning maybe is slightly better in certain areas, as far as like doing some cool connections with the first film, and has more of a tighter pace and stuff. But at the same time, on a more cohesive story, I give credit with Dominion, with what director Paul Schrader was trying to do, with trying to make it more of a psychological take, similar to the third one. So both of them have their issues, and they're not really that good, but I still don't think they're as terrible as what a lot have made out to be, and it's certainly nowhere near as bad as 2. But going into this film, I was very skeptical for many reasons. One, being that this was being directed by David Gordon Green, who gave us the Halloween trilogy for the last few years, my skepticism was very at an all-time high, especially after the disappointing 2018 Halloween. That was really unnecessary in my opinion. And then going to Kills, which I thought was, while it was a step up, it still had its issues, but it was still a watchable film. And then doing Halloween Ends, that was such an insult to the entire franchise that it basically killed the whole Halloween franchise for me personally. And knowing how much I hated that film, I was not going into this with any kind of expectations, because when I also heard that essentially David Gordon Green was wanting to make a trilogy out of this, like he did with the Halloween franchise, I just really kind of wonder, like, okay, how are you going to really make this on that level? And what's going to really separate this movie compared to all the countless knockoffs we've seen of possession films? And after going to the trailers, I'll give it credit with that it was actually had some creepy imagery, the way it was edited and stuff. But from what I also heard, the movie was at a bad sign, because not only did it suffer from it had a massive test screenings that happened to where it got really negative reactions, but they had to basically reshoot the movie as well. And so going into this, I was already seeing that this was definitely a bad sign. And upon seeing the film, it's really sad how this movie actually makes, and I'm going to say this actually makes Exorcist II look better by a mile in a lot of ways. And that's saying a lot, because as much as I hate Exorcist II, that is at least a film that at least looks beautiful. It has some ambition. it tries to do something a little different. Like it tries to do something really different compared to the first one. So obviously, it has a lot of issues with that. But I still got to give it credit because it still tried to do something. And as batshit crazy it is, it's still at least watchable. Unlike this piece of shit that tries to play not only very safe with it being like every other countless possession horror film we've seen where little girl gets possessed and all kinds of different exorcism movies we've had over the years, but also it's insulting as a sequel because it also takes in other stuff that I'll get into, but it was definitely such a huge waste of my time. And so, if I'm going to get into any kind of pros, I will have to say that, okay, Ann Dowd, who plays the neighbor in this, I thought she was good. I thought her performance was good. I also do like the makeup they do with the little girls. It definitely does have some really great, practical effects they use for them. Especially the one little girl, Catherine, who does resemble Reagan in certain parts. So I thought that was cool. And to a certain degree, okay, the novelty of seeing Ellen Burstyn back as Chris Reagan again was interesting. But unfortunately, I have a huge con with that negates the entire reasoning. But I still thought her performance was good, but she is really wasted in this. And I could say the same thing of Leslie Odom Jr. as well. His performance is good, but again, it's the writing that really holds his character and a lot of the other characters back from being any kind of, not of caring for too much that happens in this film. And so, to get into more of my cons, I don't even know where to start. When the movie pretty much opens and everything, we are basically getting into the backstory that deals with Leslie Odom Jr., who was with his wife in Haiti, and there's an earthquake or something that happens where there's basically somewhat of a story going on with this character where pretty much he loses his wife, and pretty much he ends up having to, raise his little girl on his own and stuff, and then we cut to years later where she's essentially going to school with her friend Catherine. Then the other little girl, his name is Angela. They both end up going to the woods, and already from the start, it really seems like they were really not really doing much with these two girls because we're led to believe that they're already best friends and stuff, but we don't really see them really do anything that really made me feel like, that kind of vibe that I was getting from, because we really don't really know much about them, and they just immediately go into the woods and go off on their own little area, and then the parents basically are looking for them throughout the rest of the film, of the first 30 minutes or so. And so the first 30 minutes already feels like it's trying to basically copy Prisoners in a certain way. I was kind of getting that vibe, and I was like, okay, basically here you're trying to go with that kind of level of, the little girl is missing stuff. And had you would have built up to that more, I probably would have had more of interest. I could have felt a lot more interested of where it was going. But man, as soon as they spend a majority of it where they're pretty much looking for them, and then when they eventually find them, they already basically rush into the stuff where they're already showing signs of, not there and stuff. And this is already the fact that, we really don't really know much about the other family, because other than the Catherine's parents, going to the church and stuff, and, being Christian, it just really seems like they take more of a backseat and not really given a whole lot much development. And the same thing can be said of Leslie Odom's character. It's like, other than him being a photographer and stuff, we really don't really know much about him other than that. And the only one that I think that kind of gets somewhat of a character arc is the neighbor that's played by Ann Dowd. Because there's something that happens later that I'll get into where she essentially has to get involved with these other characters they introduced to do an exorcism. And so she was definitely the only one I could see that kind of has somewhat of an arc. But still, going into that, when we get to the actual stuff that involves the Exorcist and everything, even that is really fucking painful, because it goes into the most generic territory where not only are they going with the same structure like they did with the first film, where you had, remember you had Reagan pretty much showing early signs and stuff, and she starts, saying vulgarity and stuff like that. And then when they eventually get it to where they're starting to show more of their menacing side and everything, it comes across as not only very sophomoric, but also we don't really see much of them, the little girls really do anything. Okay, there's scenes where, like, Angela is going into the bathroom and she's flicking lights on back and forth. And then you have, like, just a couple of jump scares that happen that are just what you would expect when characters come up and stuff. Or you're seeing, like, the images of, like, or you're seeing a conversation that happens between her and her father, and then you see like the demon side of her in the background or something like that. You know, that kind of scene could have worked a lot better had it would have been played out a lot and had built more tension on it. On top of that, even with the other girl, there's just a part where she goes into the church and she's all kind of bloody-fied, and she just keeps saying the body and the blood in the body or whatever it was, and it's just not really menacing, because in the original film, you were seeing Reagan not only saying a lot of vulgar stuff that, you know, was pretty ahead of its time, but also some of the really brutal, disturbing shit she was doing in the original film was really scary, and even to this day, you know, between the whole spider walk scene and the part where she takes the cross and starts, you know, stabbing. But just there was just so much about the demon doing so much with the original film that it's really hard to see what they were going to do with this one. And so, even when we get into the later exorcism stuff, it really, before we even get to that, when they finally introduce Ellen Burstyn's character with Chris Reagan, I shit you not, she's barely in this movie for about like 5 or 10 minutes, give or take. And even when they use her character, all she does is just reference stuff from the first film, and she just has somewhat of a... She talks about Reagan basically going into hiding and stuff like that, but really, as her confrontation with the actual demon and stuff like that really serves no purpose. And also, one of the most insulting things I really hated with their character in this is the way that she was, you know, talking about how she wasn't present during the actual original exorcism, and because she mentions, and I shit you not, she says patriarchy. Now, it's really coming a lot from a woman that basically had her daughter possessed, had 2 priests that had to basically sacrifice themselves literally in order to have them save her daughter, and that's the fucking thanks they get. Yeah, that was really a fucking piss poor. That's just a really big insult to the original film. And that's another thing that I gotta always criticize with David Gordon Green and a lot of his writing, is that much like with Halloween 2018, it's like, okay, I get you're trying to, you know, pay honor to the original films and stuff, but when you're also saying fuck it, having that very cynicism where you're basically saying fuck you to a lot of other stuff and being hypocritical and doing your own thing, that I think is just a big insult. And so that really pissed me off when that happened. And so after that, when we get Chris going to confront the demon, you know, all she's really doing is just what she does is really stupid too, because she goes in a room alone where she's trying to confront the demon and talk to him and stuff, and to the little girl Catherine, and then she gets her eyes stabbed out and stuff, and while it can be brutal, it just makes it really seem like her significance serves absolutely no purpose, because later on we get into the stuff that it finally involves where the exorcism is going on, and they introduce other characters that don't have little to no development going on with them, especially this priest they introduced that I thought we could have a lot more build up, because there's this kind of conflict that he has later on in the film where he's debating whether or not he still wants to do the exorcism because he's told by the church that he can't, that he's not allowed to, but then he ends up going to it anyway. And even that, I thought that character was even pointless, because when he tries to do the exorcism, it doesn't do anything, because the 2 girls, the demon basically ends up, of course we had to have another fucking callback to the first movie where they twist his head, you know, all the way around 360 style, and the effect they did also looked really bad too. So that didn't really do it for me. Not to backpedal, but I also thought the pacing in this was really fucking boring at times, where as the movie keeps dragging along with trying to get to the whole point with, especially in the first half, it really seemed like it was getting into stuff that I just wasn't really interested in as it went along, because there was nothing that really grabbed me on with any of the characters in this. And when we get into the final climax that takes place where you have the actual exorcism and stuff, the only thing that they try to do is basically doing like a sacrifice that happens where they have to choose like who basically gets saved and stuff like that. And it almost seems like, okay, the route they're going for is they save basically Angela from being possessed, and so that means Catherine dies. But the problem is the way that the movie plays it out, it almost really, I didn't really feel anything much with it, because when she gets her comeuppance, I didn't feel anything because I didn't fucking know much about the character, so it literally left me with no impact. And then we pretty much get into the final end scenes that take place where we get, surprisingly enough, Reagan coming in for a small cameo. And I have a lot of questions on like where that was really going throughout, because it really seemed like had the movie could have maybe brought in Reagan as like a focal point and stuff, where she's actually in on the actual exorcism, it really could have made a lot more sense had she would have been in the final climax when it took place on that. Like maybe her coming in and her confronting the demon. That I think would have probably had a better payoff or something. But her just coming in there for a small, quick cameo to visit her mother, it really felt really forced and really tacked on. And so, what can I say? I mean, there's really so much I could go into more with this movie, but there's really nothing that really gets into my skin crawl than more seeing a very generic and very have been there, done like several fucking possession movies that we see all the time. And this is nothing new that we have seen. And if this is going to be the first of a trilogy, it's at a really bad fucking start for the most part. You know, this is one of those things where I feel like David Gordon Green should just stick to comedies, and he really needs to stop doing franchises. And I think that if he wants to really stick with horror films, he should really do like more original films and things like that, because I really don't have any hope with this being any better if they end up turning this into a trilogy. And so it's really sad that the Pope's Exorcist was actually a very more better made movie than this, and was a lot more entertaining than this. Because at least in that film, at least I could take, you know, Russell Crowe having fun in that one, and they used the whole two people possessed kind of thing a lot better, despite having some issues with its writing that level. So overall, I'm going to have to say this is going to definitely be one of the worst sequels I've ever seen in my life, and definitely going to be one of my lists of one of the worst films of this year. And if I ever own this movie as part of the collection, because I'm guilty, I do own Exorcist 2, The Heretic, and also the other films on DVD, especially with the first, and then also with, yes, I do own the second one, and the third one. But if it ever comes to I end up basically owning the film as part of the series, I would only own it if somebody either gave it to me or if I got it at just a very extremely low, very low price. You know, it's kind of the same way I feel with Good Day to Die Hard. I don't own that film because that's another franchise. But I mean, if I'm a completionist, maybe someday I'll get it just to be as part of the collection. But I like to pretend this movie doesn't exist, and 3 is going to always be the true sequel and the only good sequel that this franchise needs. And so, with that being said, I'm giving this movie a flat line on the Film Freaks meter. And so, for those of you who have also seen The Exorcist Believer and also the other films in the Exorcist franchise, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.